Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
James sat poring over books and maps, quietly planning out a trip for their second honeymoon, a chance to reconnect, rekindle, and change his life forever. As he pored over the information about Zion National Park, one hike kept coming back to him again and again. It seemed perfect. The trail led through towering walls of red rocks. Pools of water and streams provided a nice cool reprieve in the summer and some icy echoes in the winter. Part of the way, the trail is paved, giving you the extra cues you need to keep going, even as the terrain gets tough. It's a climb from the very start, but once you get to the dirt trail, you know you are close to the summit. The overlook. The location that pictures just cannot compare to when you're seeing it with your own eyes. In the 60 years the trail has been open, hundreds of thousands of individuals have experienced the rigorous demands of the trail and settled their sights on the breathtaking beauty spanning beneath them. Not only was it beautiful, but it was safe. In the 60 years since the trail has been open, not a single person has fallen. Not a single person until now. But the question lingers. Did she fall? Or was she pushed? Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hi, hello, welcome back. I am your host, Kayla, and this is a true crime story, and it's also one of those stories that proves that laws matter, or more specifically, how you use those laws, either to prove your case or assert your innocence, matter. They are truly what make or break the case. It is this reason that it is being placed in front of a judge. Most of the time, it just goes to show how complex the law can be. For three people can read the same law and have wildly different understandings of it. And it is the job of the attorneys to take the facts of the situation and the things that cannot change in a very particular situation, plug those facts into the rules or the laws and determine which law has been broken or violated, and if there's enough proof to hold the violating party accountable in front of a judge and in front of their peers or in front of the jury. Today, it seems the innocent until proven guilty is less and less believed. Like there's just so much video footage out there anymore that it's a little bit harder to discredit things because it's on camera. But in 1997, one case proved to be much more difficult to prosecute than many others. James and Patricia Bottarini got married in 1988 while in Machu Picchu in Peru. So already we can determine that they are an adventurous couple. Patty was 27 and James was 29 at the time. And when they returned home to San Diego, California, they began to settle into their routine. And that routine included working and pretty quickly having kids. James and Patricia, or Patty as we're going to call her in this episode, would have two boys, and it was their routine that took them to Medford, New Jersey when their sons were 3 and 9 months old. Patty and her family were from California, and her family had done really well for themselves. They owned a significant amount of real estate holdings and investments, and the business itself, Patty was part owner of, so she held 1/12 of the company's interest. And this company is called Tobo Investment Partnership. And James and his family were also pretty wealthy. I'm not entirely sure what background or what sort of business that they might have been involved in, but they both came from well-off families, so they were stable and they were mindful and they were comfortable. Yet studies show that relationships really begin to struggle when children are introduced. Happiness and fulfillment for many couples actually decreases drastically when a child comes into the family, and that happiness declines each time another child is added. With this, eventually your happiness level that you don't know what to do with, and for many couples struggling with staying connected to their partners, being happy and fulfilled in their relationship and home life. And because of this, many couples struggle to stay connected to their partners and be happy and fulfilled in their relationship and their home life. It isn't until the first child leaves the home that the happiness starts to come back up. And this isn't to say that couples aren't happy. It's just leads to a better understanding for why one day James looked at Patty and suggested a vacation, a second honeymoon to celebrate as they were nearing their 10-year anniversary. Just the two of them, and Patty loved the idea. Things had been really hard in their relationship, and while Patty never confided in what was going on with her friends or family, people were noticing tension growing in the couple. They had actually gone out to San Diego to visit some of Patty's family, and where they were staying while they were in town, the neighbor of that home, her name was Patty Wilmot. Now, Patty Wilmot was very familiar with Patricia Bottarini. So neighbor Patty was excited to hear that Patty was coming to visit, but when she and James arrived, neighbor Patty was quick to notice that Patty was just not as outgoing as normal. She didn't seem as lively as she usually did. She just seemed like extremely grumpy and agitated, like something was bothering her, and she just didn't have the words to get it out of her system yet. And she also mentions that she could hear James yelling, and he just seemed to always be really angry. Since they were around family and already close to the area, they decided to have a quick vacation, just the two of them, and that's all she wrote. On May 7th, 1999, James and Patty flew into Las Vegas, where they were staying the night and then driving to Zion the next day. Now, here is where the first sign of something being off comes up in this particular story. So we know that they are going to Vegas, which is perfect for James, who has a bit of a gambling problem. In the 4 years between 1990 and 1994, while they had been living in San Diego, James went to Vegas more than 50 times. And at one point, he had been $73,000 in debt, which maybe is part of what prompted the move to New Jersey. But nonetheless, they were going to Vegas now. And while over $70,000 in debt is a lot of money to owe someone for gambling, they had enough money, especially thanks to Patty's family, to kind of be a little bit more understanding of where they were financially. The $70,000, like, it wasn't something that they were like super upset about. And I think from what I understand of the articles I read, James's family actually had enough money that they didn't really need to dip into Patricia's wealth at all to pay that off. And it is just mind-boggling to me to just like brush off $70,000 of debt as not a whole lot. But I can also see where that is, it's a recurring habit. You're spending money to go to Vegas, and then you're spending money to gamble, and then you're coming home with less money than what you left with. And so I can see that also adding up and causing pressure in a relationship where even though you have the money, it's still like, this is a habit at this point, right? And of course, in all of this, we don't really have Patty's side of the story. As many of the places we visit in this podcast are, Zion National Park is both breathtaking and deadly. The landscape is full of canyons that you can wade through, the waters or sheer cliffs that require hiking steep inclines, and in some cases facing a very real fear of falling. As we covered in Tragedy with a View's very first ever episode, there are many people who have fallen to their deaths in this park. So many that some claim that this park is haunted. Side note, if you go back, let me rephrase this. If you listened already to the very first episode, I would just like to thank you for still being here. If you feel the need to go back and listen to that episode, I'm just going to give you the warning that the audio you experience at this point in the podcast is extremely different than the audio that is in the first episode, the first few episodes, actually. So bear that in mind listening to that one. Thank you so much. Zion first received federal protections in 1909 when President William Howard Taft designated the 229 square mile area in southwestern Utah as a national monument. The monument originally had the name Makuntuweap, which means straight canyon in Paiute. The area was then designated a national park in 1919, and the name was changed to Zion because people were worried that the name Makuntuweap would be too difficult to say and that it would discourage people from visiting the park and talking about the park and encouraging other people to visit the park as well. Which, just for clarification, I personally didn't feel that that name is difficult to say, so I think it was just an excuse. But this park is home to some very classic features, canyons, waterfalls, and hikes such as the Narrows, Angel's Landing, and Observation Point. Personally, I have been to Zion and I loved it. It was beautiful and amazing, and I complained the entire time climbing up Angel's Landing, but I would 10 out of 10 times do it again. I think I actually saw a picture the other day on social media, and I sent it to Sam because this is me. And it says, "My mama raised a complainer, not a quitter. It'll get done, but you're going to hear about it." And that was basically me hiking Angel's Landing. Was I complained about it, but I did it. But while we were there, one of the hikes that we didn't get to do was Observation Point. Now, today, the trail that we're going to be talking about in this episode, Observation Point Trail, is permanently closed because there was just a lot of rockfall going, and every time they cleared out the trail and got it reopened, another rockfall would occur. And so the trail closed in 2019, but you can still make your way to Observation Point by following the East Mesa Trail, which is kind of the quote-unquote less intense option, or Stave Spring Trail, which, if I remember correctly, Stave Spring Trail technically starts outside of the park. If somebody here knows better, you're welcome to correct me. So by the time that Sam and I visited in 2022, I think, Observation Point Trail was closed because of the rockfall. We went and hiked the Narrows, and we actually, the day that we were hiking, it flash flooded and a woman unfortunately passed away. And then we also went from the Narrows and then did Angel's Landing. And by the time we got done with Angel's Landing, we were basically ready to go back to our cabin for a nap. And then thanks to all of the rain that they had, we didn't get another opportunity over the course of the 2-ish days that we were there. And I would go back and do it. That would be like the number one thing on my list. If I was to go back to Zion today, Observation Point, I would want to do that. But I digress. Observation Point Trail leads you to this overlook that actually looks down on Angel's Landing. It is 6,521 feet or 1,987 meters in elevation and is the flat summit of Mount Baldy, overlooking the Virgin River as it sliced a canyon through Zion. Observation Point Trail, prior to it closing, took you from the canyon floor at Weeping Rock all the way to the summit. With a climb of over 2,000 feet in elevation, this is a bigger climb than the approximate 1,500 feet that you climb for Angel's Landing. The hike is a total of 8 miles long, out and back style, and while the trail tends to be narrow, like a few feet wide in places, and steep, it also winds you through smaller canyons, near sources of water, through cave-like structures. Honestly, you can't go wrong with any of the hikes in Zion, but Observation Point Trail was a highlight. And honestly, Observation Point still is. This Observation Point Trail generally took people about 6 hours to complete, which is telling of how difficult the terrain is. So as James and Patty decide to go hiking in Zion on the following day after they arrived. So they arrived in Vegas on the 7th, drove to Zion on the 8th, and then decided to go hiking on May 9th, 1997. As they are hiking, they are finding it more and more work than what they realize. As they started the hike, they were in good spirits, but as the time went on, that got less and less true. At some point on the trail, they passed Donald and Glenda Cox, who were coming down from observation point from earlier that morning, and they just do the casual nod and hi as they pass. James and Patty make it about 3/4 of the way, and at this point, they're tired, and when you're tired, you get grumpy, and you're just not having fun, and the rest of the climb just doesn't seem worth it. In addition to this, Patty is struggling because, at least at this point on the trail, there is a massive drop-off on one side, and she has a huge fear of heights. If it were me, I would suggest that you keep going, but James and Patty decided that the views they could see were good enough, and it was time to turn around. According to James, he was leading the way down, which, to be entirely fair, when we are going down steep trails, I'll often have Sam walk in front of me just because I also have a fear of heights, and his presence in front of me gives me something to focus on outside of the heights and where we're at in my peripheral vision. So James is in front of Patty, and apparently he's like 10 to 15 feet ahead of her, and he hears something behind him. It's like a shuffle, but when he turns around, he sees Patty laying on her stomach, and she's on the ground, and she's scrambling with her feet to regain purchase, and then she just slips over the edge of the trail. James, according to him, rushes to the edge of the cliff looking down, but he can't see where Patty fell to. With nothing else to do, James then leaves to go to try to find help and figure out what to do. Donald and Glenda Cox, who were still on their way down from Observation Point Trail, they were just enjoying their trip. They're a relatively fit couple who retired and decided to travel around the area, and Zion is a clear location for them to visit. It was while they were on their way down when they heard some ruckus. At first, they thought maybe it was a rock fall, so they turned to look upward toward the noise, and instead they see a woman cartwheeling down over the edge. According to them, it was, quote, like a cheerleader. So she is nearly sideways, like upright, cartwheeling down the mountainside. And as they realize that this is the woman that they had just passed on the trail, she comes to a stop in her fall. Donald and Glenda are frozen for a moment. They're horrified at what they just witnessed, and the feeling only grows when they realize that there's no one screaming down over the cliff for her. It's almost as if the man that they had passed, who had been with her, didn't even see her fall. Donald and Glenda are right away using their binoculars to try to find where Patty landed because she kind of fell out of view due to the rocks and the trees and the brush and the canyon. And when they can't locate her, they decide to run down the rest of the trail to go get in their car and get help. The most notable part of this for me, in my mind, is the amount of force needed to be upright and cartwheeling down the mountain doesn't generally come from sliding off your belly to the side of a cliff. The other thing that doesn't make sense to me is that no one noted any screaming. Actually, the only person who noted any screaming was James, but nobody else in the vicinity. And there were multiple people. We're going to come to that here in a second. There were multiple people that were in this area, and nobody heard any screaming at all. And it just makes me question, because there's no screaming even from James as he watches his wife fall off this trail. So shortly after Patty fell, James is, heading down the trail where he started to pass a group of 6 people who were coming up the trail. This group included 2 men by the name of Mike Fulton and Robert Falk. As they pass, they notice something off about James, but he wasn't crying and he wasn't saying anything. He wasn't running. He was just kind of like calmly walking, though he looked a bit shaken up over something. His eyes were darting around. His hands were shaking. He also didn't ask them for help, but he tells them that his wife fell and he couldn't find her. But the way that he says this doesn't alarm anyone in the group of 6. They kind of assume, based on his tone, that she maybe tripped and hurt her ankle. And so he left to go see if maybe he could find some help. And when he didn't find anyone, he went back up to meet her, and she wasn't where he left her. To be clear, James has no urgency in his demeanor at all. And I mean, everyone reacts to a situation like this differently. Like, shock is a really crazy thing, and it can make people do things that they normally wouldn't do. But the fact that there's just no urgency at all, it's like he's completely detached from the situation. That just seems very odd. And it isn't until after someone in the group pulls up, they've got a topography map, and they're like, okay, where is she? We can help you carry her. And James, at that point, clarifies that she is not on the trail anymore, but he has no idea where she landed. And that's when all the dots connect, and they're like, oh, she fell off the trail. This group is then like, you know, the good people they are, they're like, okay, we will help you find her. So they start to help search for Patty, and they can't help but notice that James is just like, he's not walking with them. He's not looking around at all. He just is behaving really weird for a husband who just witnessed his wife fall. However, as others have pointed out, being in a state of shock can make people behave in ways that we would never understand. Even if we ourselves found ourselves in the same situation, we would probably react vastly different than what the person next to us would. But it is as they are searching that Mike started to notice some odd reactions from James. As James is being questioned about where they were, what direction she went, and so on, he's just acting like standoffish, like he doesn't understand why they would even be asking these questions, and not like in a, oh, the evidence speaks for itself kind of way, but almost like the fact that they were helping to look for Patty was a huge inconvenience to him. Other members of the party were yelling at Patty's name and letting her know that help was coming. Like, they don't know this woman, and they were committed to helping her feel comfortable in the knowledge that multiple people are looking for her, and they're looking to help her. Robert, meanwhile, stepped off the trail, and he stepped onto this rock formation that had this overview of an area stretching out below the 500-foot cliff that was beneath the trail that Patty had fallen from. As he is looking, he notices that there's some vultures circling overhead, and he feels like if she was going to be anywhere, it would be here. Sure enough, he finds her, and the sight of her was, quote, not something anyone should see. She is laying on her back among the rocks and brush. One of her shoes had came off and got lost in the fall. Her shorts had been pretty much pulled all of the way down. And while she was clearly suffering from blunt force trauma, her body was described as broken, but, quote, most of her body was intact. So I will let you determine what you think that means. Robert yells to the group that he found her and that James should stay back, but James ignores this and he rushes forward. Robert really tries to kind of have him stay back, but he doesn't want James to see Patty in the state that she's in because she looks really bad. But James just, again, refuses to listen. According to Robert, James doesn't react upon seeing her. It's almost as if he had no connection to her at all. And the way he responds is just so cold and disassociated. The only reaction that he actually showed in understanding that anything was going on of importance was that at some point he looked up and notices that there's vultures that have started flying overhead. And so he picks up a rock and throws it at the vultures. And then at some point he does go over to Patty and he pulls her shorts back up to cover her. Robert at this point mentions that someone needs to go let authorities know, and James states that he doesn't want to leave Patty. So we do have that he's saying like, no, I'm going to stay here. So while he seems non-responsive, this is kind of a more normal response. Like, there are moments of human reaction, like very human, I just lost someone reaction. So Robert had been hiking with his girlfriend, and so she and one of the others offered to run the 3 miles back down the trail to get to the trailhead and find help. But remember, Glenda and Donald were already in the process of getting help, but of course none of them know this. So they're just doing the best they can, right? When park rangers finally arrive on scene, it is Ranger Brett McGinn who helps recover Patty. And he called in a helicopter to come remove Patty just based on the location alone. It was going to be really difficult to have people come in and try to remove her on foot. So he calls for a helicopter, and he also notices that James is just not acting right. James doesn't react or scream or talk to Patty. He doesn't ask to have a moment alone with her. He seems, again, completely detached for someone who just lost his wife not that long ago. And he, of course, reports this behavior because with it being coupled with everything else, it's just odd enough that he can't pass it off as shock or a different style of grieving. But he does note that as he is talking with James, that their sons come up and James starts to cry when talking about his boys. FBI Special Agent Pat Buccello arrives on scene, basically acting as a first responder, and she gets there after Patty's remains are already in the process of being removed. So when she arrives on scene, she notices right away that there's a man who is clearly shaken up, and as she approaches him and asks his name, and he tells her that his name is Robert, and Special Agent Pat starts to talk to him as if he is Patty's husband. And to her, he's clearly grieving and he is in shock. And when he finally realizes, like, oh, she thinks I'm the husband, he lets her know, like, no, I'm just the person who found her. Her husband's over there. Special Agent Pat was really surprised that he wasn't Patty's husband. Like, he was having, of the people who were there, he was having the most, I just lost my spouse of 10 years reaction. Special Agent Pat is here to investigate the death of Patty, so this right away stands out to her. And among the others there, she couldn't identify anyone else who was having an emotional response to this woman tragically dying. Further, she investigates the place where James said that she fell from and then slid over the edge. And there was nothing in the dirt or rocks or stones to indicate that someone had fallen and then scrambled. There were no marks in the soil that showed Patty had tried to claw her way back up or stop her fall. And this right away leads Special Agent Pat to believe that something cleaner happened on the trail, something more consistent with Patty being pushed over the edge. Being pushed would also provide enough momentum to be doing those big dramatic somersaults that Donald and Glenda witnessed.
Hello, my name is DJ, and I'm the host of the Mythical True Crime Podcast. Join me and the Darkcast network of indie podcast creators as we delve into the mysterious and the macabre, exploring captivating tales of true crime, legends, and unsolved mysteries from the realms of mythology and reality. Uncover the dark, true tales of modern legends with our spoken narratives that blend history, crime, and the supernatural. Just starting Season 3, you can listen to the newest episodes every other week, as well as all my backlog episodes, on anywhere you can listen to your podcasts.
James, who was now tasked with calling people and letting them know that Patty had died, first calls Patty's sister, Carolyn. He tells Carolyn that they were hiking Angel's Landing and that Patty had fallen. Then he realizes his mistake and corrects it to Observation Point. And he also throws in the detail that she was screaming as she fell. But Donald and Glenda didn't hear any screaming. They didn't hear any screaming, and they were close enough that they expected to. And I've seen a lot of people question this, and they make it a red flag, the fact that he mixed up Angel's Landing and Observation Point. But I don't necessarily agree with that, because Observation Point and Angel's Landing are iconic hikes in Zion National Park. They both have switchbacks that you need to climb in order to get up to them. There are narrow trails on both of them. And Observation Point looks down on Angel's Landing. So it's also like similar in area. And it isn't crazy to me that somebody might mix them up. But Carolyn is like, what? She fell? How? And she's just so surprised by this because Patty was fit and in shape, and this trail would have been nothing for her to hike the whole way. In addition to that, Carolyn knew that Patty was afraid of heights, and there was just no way that she would get close enough to the edge for her to slip and fall and slide over. So things are not adding up for Carolyn either. And she makes this clear when 6 months later, she was presented a letter labeling Patty's death as accidental, and Carolyn just refused to sign it. Patty was autopsied, and the autopsy revealed nothing shocking. She died from injuries resulting from blunt force trauma. She had no drugs or alcohol in her system. There were no defensive wounds or other injuries consistent with a struggle. It is the more official look into the life and death of Patricia Bottarini that began to find information, motivations for James to maybe want Patty out of the picture. Like that sometime just prior to their trip, Patty set up a life insurance policy payable to James upon her death in the amount of $250,000. When you combine this with the amount that James would receive from her interest in the family business, he was looking at over $1 million. Actually, the $1 million was about what the business interest Patty had was, so the monetary inheritance was closer to $1.25 million. The insurance policy is another part where James is giving different stories to different people. So originally he told the family that he knew that Patty had a life insurance policy and he knew who it was through, the amount, and that he was the beneficiary. And then 6 months later, when Special Agent Pat was questioning him, he claimed not to know anything about it. And this was during a taped phone conversation. When it came time for her funeral, Carolyn, again, Patty's sister, refused to allow James into her home, and she just didn't trust him at all. She believed that he had something to do with the death of her sister, and she is not the only one. So 5 days after Patty died, investigators finally go back up to the trail where Patty supposedly slipped and fell to investigate, which 5 days in the elements is a long time. Long enough that they would lose evidence of potentially anything happening. But they don't find nothing. 8 feet or so down from the ledge that Patty fell from, they find their first sign of blood, indicating that this would have probably been the first significant point of contact her body made with the cliff, causing her death. With it being so close to the trail, they reasoned that she had to have gone off the cliff with some force in order to hit hard enough to harm her and leave blood behind, indicating that she was pushed. But it isn't until 5 years later, in November of 2002, that James Bottarini was charged with crimes in connection to Patty's death. He is not charged for murder, but he is charged with interstate domestic violence, which is when you cross state lines with the intent to harm someone. He was charged with false statements to federal officers and several counts of wire fraud as he was trying to get the insurance money. And I'm honestly confused about that specific part of it because he was the beneficiary, so he was allowed to have the insurance money. But I'm wondering if maybe there was like a hold on it and he was like falsifying information trying to get to it. I'm not really sure. That part I'm not really sure exactly what the goal was. And most notably, at least right away, he was not charged with the murder of Patty. So there could be a lot of reasons why he was not charged immediately with some form of homicide, but this was a more local court. And so I think what it comes down to is, did they have the resources available to properly investigate and prove that this was murder? And when they determined that they didn't, they also took into consideration that the federal government was going to be charging James as well. And they knew that he was going to be charged with murder for the murder of Patty through the federal government. So they decided to sit back and wait and see what the federal investigation provided. And if that was enough, then they would move forward as well. So I just want to clarify here, the federal government of law enforcement was pursuing murder charges, and Washington County was going to pursue murder charges as well as the wire fraud, interstate domestic violence, and false statements. But they were going to wait until the federal government was done with their trials. Many times cases are settled before they ever get to the jury selection phase, but of course this one did not. But the jury was selected purely on their physical ability to hike to Observation Point. They wanted to take the jury to the location that Patty fell, so that way they would be able to have a real-life understanding of the terrain, the location, what Patty might have been going through. It is not unusual to have a jury essentially take a field trip to the crime scene. It is, however, unusual to have that crime scene inside a national park, at least when it comes to murders. U.S. Attorney Carlos Esqueda paints James as an abuser to Patty. He was calculated in how he asked for things, and when his manipulations didn't work, control and threats did. They pointed out how in 1997, Patty had just gotten a life insurance policy when she conveniently died. They pointed out every single one of James' failed business ventures, his gambling addiction, and the financial strain that he was putting on the family. A financial strain that could be solved with $1 million, an amount that he would get if Patty died. They pointed out how fearful of heights Patty was and how she would never have gotten close to the edge. They pointed out his inconsistencies with reactions and information provided about where they had been, how she fell, and if he knew about the life insurance policy. They pointed out how James's reaction was so weird and really had everyone who witnessed him on edge. James's attorney, Ronald Yengrich, argued that James was in shock and no one should blame a man for how he reacts to losing his wife in a tragic accident, which is fair. They also show photos disclaiming Patty's fear of heights by displaying photos of her rappelling in Machu Picchu, Peru. They had pointed out how it took investigators 5 days to decide that this case was fishy, implying that they originally didn't think that it was anything to look into, and how there was a huge lack of evidence that Patty did anything but trip, fall, and slip to her death. But it wasn't just the information that was being argued at this trial. There was also a ton of expert witnesses present to provide clarity and extra information. Bill Silva, who was a forensic evidence analysis, testified about 3 very distinct bloodstains that were found near the edge, and their location, based on James's timeline, are impossible for Patty to have slipped and fallen and injured herself to the point where she would be bleeding at those locations. The only explanation is that she didn't just fall, but that she was pushed. He also noted that there were what appeared to be drag marks in the direction of the edge of the cliff, which, according to James's story, she had been on her belly and she had been sliding over the cliff, which I guess I would want to know if the drag marks were potentially made by a certain body part, because depending on that would either corroborate or destroy James's tale. Also, I'm curious about when these drag marks were noticed, because when Special Agent Pat investigated and looked up at the trail, she stated that she didn't find anything. And then 5 days later, what are you finding 5 days later on a very popular trail? Next, John Similik, who was a fall trajectory and blood evidence expert, studied the area, what information was found, and determined that her fall would be categorized as an airborne vault, which is when someone or something is in motion and they hit something that is low down. So an example of this would be like when you're walking and your foot catches a curb or the uneven sidewalk. This momentum from your body still moving forward, combined with a sudden stop of the foot, causes you to pitch forward and lose your balance. A bit more extreme case of this was witnessed with Patricia, where she was end over end cartwheeling down the cliff face. This, of course, though, suggests that Patricia had, rather than slipping and falling, been pushed or thrown from the trail. So there was effort behind her ejection off the trail, not just sliding. Combine this with the blood pattern and the spacing of it indicates that she had momentum from the start going off of the cliff. So she didn't just slide and then pick up speed. She was propelled from the cliff, from the trail, from the start. Following Similik was travel behavior analysis Kay Jones, who evaluated this case and found, as has been mentioned before, that Patty was fearful of heights. And when Kay Jones visited this trail, they found that this is definitely a part of the trail where going near the edge would have been extremely difficult for someone who had a fear of heights. On the other side of the experts, we have Doug Oblinker, who was a forensic anthropologist who stated that the trail being very worn due to its popularity, along with the worn tread of Patty's boots, could absolutely result in someone slipping and falling to their death. Jack Arston, who is a biomechanical specialist, determined that the cartwheeling motion that Patty fell with could have been caused due to her, exactly like my example, catching her foot on a rock on the trail, tripping, and then being unable to catch her balance before propelling herself off of the cliff. Which is exactly why the defense wanted this brought up, right? Like, it's plausible to believe that a woman was thrown to her death. Yes, it is. Is it possible that she tripped and fell in a very similar manner? Also, yes. It's James's story that doesn't match up here. So if he really wanted to just cover his bases, he could have just said that he heard some noise behind him and by the time he turned around, she was gone. Or if she tripped and fell, then you say that. It's all the extra details that he gave that don't match up to the evidence being found, to the science of what is being found. Wilson Hayes, who was a professor of exercise science, demonstrated how different types of falls look, specifically looking at the slipping and sliding over the edge versus being projected over the edge. And he ended his questions with the statement that he saw no scenario where Patty accidentally fell to her death. Neighbor Patty was also questioned on the stand and stated that when James returned home after Patty died, he was no longer angry. He wasn't yelling. He actually seemed happy. And further, when James was preparing the house to be sold, she found a ton of Patty's stuff in the trash that was keepsakes type stuff. They were important to Patty and probably important to her family, and James just threw them away. James, though, also took the stand and vehemently denied wanting his wife dead or killing her. All in all, the trial itself took 3 weeks to go through. The prosecution's goal was to prove that Patty's fall could not have been an accident, not that they were trying to prove how James killed her or pushed her, rather than Patty didn't just trip and fall to her death. It is after all of the information is provided to the jury that they take the field trip and they see how all of the people talk and react that they are sent to deliberate on the guilt of James. 10 hours later, they acquit James or find him not guilty. But there's a problem. 10 of the 12 jurors thought that he was guilty and 2 thought that he was not guilty. So where was the problem? Well, they thought that if they couldn't come to an agreement, that they had to find him not guilty. In actuality, they could come to a hung jury. A hung jury is where the jury can't make a decision, and at this point, the judge will call a mistrial, and James would not have to be either named guilty or not guilty. At this point, it kind of goes back to the parties in the lawsuit where they can decide if they want to retry the case, which will cost additional money. They can try to settle. They can drop the charges. They can decide what to do at that point. But because they found James not guilty, he cannot be charged again due to double jeopardy, where in the case of a mistrial, double jeopardy is not affected. For those who don't know, double jeopardy protects the defending party from being tried over and over for the same crimes, and it basically prevents James from being charged again in a federal court for the same charges. But if you will remember, Washington County has not yet charged James for the murder of Patty. But with this not guilty verdict, they didn't feel that they had enough to build a successful case, so they haven't pursued this. However, Patty's family still went after James. In a criminal lawsuit, it is a government entity like the state or the county or the city or federal government versus an individual. In a civil case, it is, in this case, the family of Patty, so person or people, versus James, so individual, people, person. So person versus person in civil, government entity versus person in criminal. Patty's family, the life insurance company, and the court-appointed guardian for the children of James and Patty all filed paperwork to have the courts block James's ability to receive financial benefits from Patty's death. And due to this, James countersues. It wasn't until 2005 that a settlement was reached where James makes no admission of guilt. He walks away from his claim in the company shares that Patty held when she died, and we don't know if he got any or all of the insurance money. Part of settling a lawsuit outside of court is that the details are usually confidential. The thing is, we don't know, and unless James ever comes forward and gives us another story, we can only go on what he has to say. He could be telling the truth, and the truth is, relationships are complicated. Even when two people get along great, when kids come along, you still have a ton of concentrated effort to stay connected with your partner. Even without kids, you still have to choose your partner on a daily basis. You choose to love them, support them, find ways to lift them up and better their life along with your own. Commitment is less gray, but the truth of what happened to Patty is going to linger forever. Today's episode sources include Death in Zion, NWI Times, Desert News, Herald News, Huron Daily Tribute, and Alpinist.com. I got the information about Observation Point Trail off of a blog where someone hiked the trail prior to it being closed in 2019. The blog is called ZionAdventurePhotog.com, and the author of the article was Erica Bauer. Thank you so much for listening. We will chat again next week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.